April 13, 1970. Nearly 200,000 miles from Earth, in the silent vacuum of space, a routine procedure turns into a nightmare. A switch is flipped, a tank is stirred, and then an explosion tears through the spacecraft. Warning lights flash, systems fail, oxygen begins leaking into the darkness. Inside the capsule, 3 astronauts stare at their instruments, trying to understand the damage. Back on Earth, in Houston, Texas, a calm but chilling message comes through the radio. Houston, we've had a problem. What began as America's 3rd attempt to land on the moon instantly becomes a desperate fight for survival. Apollo 13 launched on April 11, 1970, from Kennedy Space Center. Commander Jim Lovell was on his 4th spaceflight. Fred Haise and Jack Swigert were ready to make history. Millions of Americans watched, proud and confident. NASA had already landed men on the moon with Apollo 11 and Apollo 12. This mission seemed almost routine. But space never becomes routine. 55 hours into the flight, the crew was nearly 250,000 miles from home. Swigert was asked to stir the oxygen tanks, a standard housekeeping task. Unknown to everyone, damaged wiring inside one tank, weakened during a pre-launch test years earlier, sparked when the fan was activated. Oxygen tank 2 exploded. The blast crippled the service module. Oxygen tank 1 began losing pressure. Oxygen was not only for breathing, it powered the fuel cells that created electricity and water. Within minutes, Apollo 13 was losing power. The moon landing was over. The mission now had one objective: bring the crew home alive. Flight Director Gene Kranz and his team in Mission Control faced an impossible situation. The command module, Odyssey, was dying. Without power, it would soon become uninhabitable. The only option was the Lunar Module, Aquarius. But Aquarius was never meant to save lives in deep space. It was designed to land 2 men on the moon for 2 days. Now it had to support 3 astronauts for 4 days while traveling hundreds of thousands of miles. In a race against time, the crew powered down Odyssey to conserve its remaining battery power for re-entry. Then they powered up Aquarius as a lifeboat. Inside the Lunar Module, conditions quickly worsened. With limited electricity, heaters were shut off. Cabin temperatures dropped close to 38 degrees Fahrenheit. The astronauts wore every piece of clothing they had. Condensation formed on the walls. Their breath turned to mist. Water was rationed to a few ounces per day. Dehydration set in. Fred Haise developed a urinary tract infection and ran a fever. Sleep became almost impossible, and yet they still had to navigate home. Because of their trajectory, Apollo 13 had to swing around the moon before returning to Earth. On the far side of the moon, all communication with Earth disappeared. For several tense minutes, Mission Control heard nothing. If the spacecraft failed there, no one would know. Then, as the spacecraft emerged from behind the moon, the signal returned. America could breathe again, for a moment. But a new danger was building inside the cabin. Carbon dioxide levels were rising. The Lunar Module's life support system was not built for 3 men. Its round filters were becoming saturated. If carbon dioxide reached toxic levels, the astronauts would slowly suffocate. In Houston, engineers gathered in a conference room. They dumped identical spare parts onto a table: plastic bags, cardboard covers, hoses, tape. Their challenge was simple but urgent: fit square command module filters into the Lunar Module's round openings. They had to invent a solution using only what the astronauts had on board. After hours of frantic experimentation, they built a crude adapter. Instructions were carefully read up to space. Lovell, Haise and Swigert followed each step precisely, taping and assembling the makeshift device. When they turned it on, carbon dioxide levels began to drop. Improvisation had saved their lives. But they were not safe yet. To return to Earth properly, the crew needed to make critical course corrections using the Lunar Module's descent engine, an engine never meant to fire in deep space. One miscalculation could send them skipping off Earth's atmosphere and into endless orbit around the Sun. Without full navigation systems, Lovell used the Earth's horizon through the spacecraft window as a visual guide, manually aligning the burn. The engine fired. The trajectory adjusted. Now came the final and most terrifying test, re-entry. The command module had been powered down for days in freezing conditions. No one had ever restarted a spacecraft from a cold shutdown in space. Engineers in Houston calculated every watt of electricity. They developed a precise power-up sequence to conserve the last remaining battery reserves. If they used too much power, the parachutes might not deploy.
As Earth grew larger in the window, the crews separated from the damaged service module. For the first time, they saw the destruction, an entire side panel blown away, twisted metal exposed to space. They had survived that, but what about the heat shield? No one could inspect it. If it had been damaged by the explosion, the capsule would burn up during re-entry at 25,000 miles per hour. On April 17, 1970, Apollo 13 slammed into Earth's atmosphere. Friction ignited plasma around the capsule, creating a fiery shell. Communication blackout began, expected during re-entry. Normally, it lasted about 3 minutes. This time, it stretched longer, 4 minutes, 5 minutes. In mission control, no one moved, no one spoke. Had the heat shield failed? Had the parachutes deployed? Then, finally, a voice crackled through the speakers, and moments later, 3 red and white parachutes blossomed against the Pacific sky. Apollo 13 splashed down safely in the South Pacific Ocean, just miles from the recovery ship USS Iwo Jima. Against staggering odds, they were home. Apollo 13 never landed on the moon. It returned no lunar samples, it planted no flag, but it demonstrated something far more powerful. It revealed the strength of teamwork under unimaginable pressure. It showed the brilliance of engineers who refused to surrender to physics and fear. It proved that courage is not the absence of crisis, it is calm action in the middle of it. The investigation later traced the explosion to damaged wiring inside the oxygen tank, altered during testing years before launch. A small flaw, a chain reaction, a near catastrophe. NASA would redesign systems, procedures would change, safety standards would rise, but Apollo 13 left behind something greater than technical improvements. In the freezing darkness between Earth and Moon, 3 astronauts depended on thousands of unseen hands, and those hands never stopped working. Gene Kranz later made famous the phrase, "Failure is not an option." Not because failure wasn't possible, but because giving up never was. Apollo 13 became known as a successful failure, a mission that transformed disaster into triumph through discipline, intelligence, and belief. Space is vast, it is indifferent, it does not care about human ambition. But in April 1970, when an explosion threatened to turn 3 astronauts into silent debris drifting forever in the void, humanity answered with ingenuity. In the coldest darkness imaginable, we did not panic, we solved, we endured, and we came home. Because sometimes the greatest victory is not reaching the moon, it is finding a way back to Earth.